This is the fifth or sixth application models in this series of videos, and it's on facility location, but really illustrates the case of mixed integer linear programming models, or MILPs, as shown here, where some of the variables are continuous while others are integer or binaries in this case. So the template for this textbook example, General Appliance Corp here, is included in reading subfolder of the 05 integer OPT folder, just like all the others. And although I'm not going to go through the 8 chapter 15 exercises in either videos or classes, they're a great example you should do on your own as part of your chapter readings. So the textbook example on General Appliance Corp, they must decide where to locate a new plant from a list of two choices. So one new plant out of two possibilities. The objective is to minimize the total transportation cost while meeting an increased customer demand without exceeding capacity as it's at its existing and the new plant. So here, the shipment amounts between the plants and distribution centers are the continuous variables, whereas the decision on where to build the new plant is represented by the two 0, 1 binaries, okay, or binary variables. So the key to understanding the model is the calculation of surplus capacity at each of the two proposed plant sites, and this is again explained in detail in the actual model on these pages 533, 536 in chapter 15. Okay, so the nominal capacity of existing plants and new plants is 1,500 units. Okay, so if you multiply that by the binary variable 0 and 1, you're either going to get a 1,500 or a 0. So that's sort of the key, right? If you get 1,500, then you can have some production, obviously, as shipment out of that plant, which is then subtracted from the capacity, and that difference has to be positive. Okay, if the capacity is 0 because the plan simply does not exist and will not exist, okay, that needs to force all the shipments out of the non-existing plant to be 0 as well, and it will. So again, all the details are um, in this file here, as well as the chapter, so please check it out, right? The rest of the model is pretty standard, including regular capacity constraints on the existing plant, meeting customer demand, right? And of course, we have to remember that we are building at most one, um, or exactly one rather than two plants. Okay, so our own example of the MILP, of a MILP, mixed integer linear programming model, is not in the class of facility location model, but it's rather an aggregate production planning model contained in this file, lect5 aggregate planning. So in this case, on this example, Payless Shoes has to decide how many workers to hire and fire over the course of the next 4 months, as well as how many hours of overtime to use in each month, and perhaps most importantly, how many pairs of shoes to produce during this 4 month planning horizon. So variables on worker hiring and firing must be integer, with OT hours and production amounts treated as continuous. So that's the mixture here. So we'll that the other constraints or other issues in this model are maxing the overtime labor and calculating the production capacity based on number of hours, production hours available. There are some calculations involved with these. Then, of course, the standard demand requirement constraint. And the objective is to minimize all the costs involved in this model, right? From hiring, firing, regular overtime labor, raw material, as well as inventory holding costs, right? So I wanted to go through the rest of the slide before switching to the model itself. So the model and its data section here shows a lot of these input parameters, which I'm going to explain as we go through the model. So I'm going to zoom in just a tad more. Forecasted demand is right here. I'm going to start by building the worker balancing equation, starting with the initial number of workers, which is 100. Okay, so then just for the sake of calculations, what I'm going to do is make up some numbers for number of workers hired and fired in the first month, right? So let's say, I, hire, let's say, let's go back, I hit enter here, and then hire just a couple of guys and fire, let's say, 10. Okay, so then the balancing equation for the number of workers available after hiring and firing is the starting number plus number of hired minus number of fired, and that's generally the same, right? So then I drag um, that equation all the way to the end, and it'll rebalance accordingly, right? The starting number of workers available at the beginning of month 2 before the hiring and firing for that month takes place is simply, of course, the end of the previous month, and I can then copy that one over there. Okay, and then let's suppose I again hire let's say 5 workers and don't fire anybody because this month the demand is relatively high, so correspondingly the production probably should be, and then I don't hire anybody here and I fire, I don't know, 20 people, and then here I don't hire anybody and fire maybe, let's say, 10. Okay, and end up at a relatively lower level of 67 workers compared to the 100 that I started with. Okay, next we then calculate a total regular time hours available based on number of workers available in that row 25 here that was calculated, with this worker hiring and firing balancing we just did. Okay, so essentially the number of workers times the number of hours, okay, regular hours per worker per month available, fixed up here, and then copied over to the right. Okay, so then we'll make up a couple of OT hours, presumably in month 2, the one with the highest demand. So I don't know, let's say 20, and then have zeros for the rest. So what that will allow us to then do is to calculate the maximum overtime labor hours available, which is then simply equal to number of workers that are available, right? Because presumably each one of these 92 here in month 1 can be working overtime times where is it, maximum overtime hours per worker per month, which is 20. Okay, so that gives you the maximum overtime hours, which is clearly a large number, right? Copied all the way to the right. Somehow forgot a 0 here. Okay, so the total hours for the production then, of course, is the regular hours plus the overtime hours, right? So rows 27 and 28 added up, copied to the right. Okay, the production. Okay, the production, let's say we make something up like 3,000 first 2 months and 1,000 for the last 2, just to have some numbers to do the math, right? Then the production capacity, okay, is the total number of production hours, which is shown here, right, which is again based on regular plus overtime, divided by number of hours needed, right, per unit of product, which is the pair of shoes here in B13, fixed up here, giving us the production capacity in units rather than hours. Okay, then the inventory after the production, all right, the inventory after the production is simply the beginning inventory, all right, plus the production in a given month, which was made up here, okay, and then minus the demand. Actually, the inventory after production is the beginning inventory, which will start here with 500 shoes, okay, plus these guys produced, right? So that's the inventory after production. And then ending inventory is inventory after production minus the demand. So it's split into 2 cells, the demand being here, right? So that we can then carry this ending inventory over here, right? And say that the inventory after production in the second month is the ending inventory for the previous month plus the production in that month. Okay, and then we're going to copy this to the right, and then we're going to grab both of these and copy these guys all the way to the right. So clearly we have not, we are not producing enough here, so we would have to adjust the production to, let's say, 4,000. Okay, that's still not enough, so maybe 4,500. Okay, and then produce a little bit more here, maybe 2,000, and that should work out then. Okay, so after that, all the cost calculations down in the bottom of the model are pretty straightforward, right? So the hiring costs are a number of workers that are hired in any given month times the cost of hiring a single worker, which is given to be $1,600 per worker. So copy that to the right. The firing cost works the same way, number of workers fired times the firing cost per worker, 2,000, right? Again, fixed up and copied to the right. Okay. Regular time wages are or is the number of workers available after hiring and firing that are working, first of all, the regular, as full-time employees, I should say, at the rate of 1,500 per worker per month, right? So that multiplying by number of workers gives us the regular wages, which obviously is going to be the highest expense. The overtime wages, on the other hand, okay, are based on the overtime labor hours used, right, times overtime labor hour use times the overtime wage rate per hour. Again, fixing the B12 and then copying that to the right. The raw material costs are given someplace here as $15 per pair of shoes, which is per unit, and number of units produced is right here in row 32 times that $15 in $B14. Okay, almost there. The last one is the inventory holding cost, which is based on the ending inventory, or the average inventory in reality, times the unit cost of holding a pair of shoes in inventory of $3. Okay, so this gives us $1,500 and then zeros for the rest of them. So the total cost obviously are just added up per month here and per cost source here, giving us a total cost of, for the current scenario, of about $750,000. Okay, so clicking on that cell and going into, where is it, add-ins, premium solver, moving it a little to the right, extending it a little bit. We're going to add the not constant, but we're going to add the objective to be F44, right? And we want to minimize the total cost. The variables that we're going to have in this example are going to be in these three sets of ranges for number of workers hired and fired, which also need to be integer, control key, overtime labor used, which are continuous, and number of pairs of shoes produced, which are also continuous. Okay, so I'm going to also add under constraints, I'm going to also add the fact that number of workers hired and fired needs to be an integer. Okay, then in addition to these guys, we have the overtime labor hours used right here have to be less than the maximum available, which is easily going to be the case. The capacity for the production amount has to be under capacity, which is right here, right? The number of pairs of shoes produced less than production capacity. And finally, the number of units on inventory after production, right, has to be at least greater than the demand in order for us to be able to meet the demand. Okay, so making unconstrained variables non-negative and choosing the LP should do it. Okay, remember about 750 grand goes down to about 700,000. So by, actually firing mostly in each of the months, especially month 3 after the demand drops off significantly, having only some labor in overtime labor in month 2 when the demand is at its peak, and then sort of reducing a little bit of the production from what I had, actually balancing it more is a better word, from what I had in the first 2 months, in order to meet the demand exactly, right? That's going to build up a little bit more of our inventory, but it's going to have, the production costs, a little bit more spread out, as well as the labor costs associated with producing those goods. Okay, so what do I got? Let's save this and model and go back to the presentation and pause.